Welcome to Profit Boss Radio, where successful women have paved the road to their own financial freedom. Each week, your host, Hillary Hendershot, financial coach, money mindset expert, and experienced wealth manager, will help you discover the keys to the wealth and peace of mind you want and deserve in her no-nonsense and authentic style. Starting right now.
Welcome to Profit Boss Radio, episode 42, 3 Things Your Financial Advisor Won't Tell You, with Wade Pfau, Professor of Retirement Income. I'm Hillary Hendershot, your host. So, if you're listening to this the day I release it, we have a new president in the U.S. as of today. Wow. I don't know who it is because I'm recording this a week in advance, but I do know that the passion runs hot. I have not expressed any political opinion on this show because it's not a political show, but I can tell you that all of the political rhetoric is a little tired, and I'm excited to get this over and done with soon. So to the winner, congratulations. Welcome to the White House. Perhaps you can turn your attention now from campaigning and mudslinging to leading the country and creating an environment where we all have access to the American dream, that hard work, determination, and initiative can make you upwardly mobile and ultimately financially free. By the way, I wanted to have a gift for you in honor of the presidential election, and I do. You're going to love it, and it's waiting for you at the end of this episode. So when Wade and I say goodbye, keep listening. Now, whoa, Profit Boss. I just got back from an amazing event for entrepreneurs in Colorado Springs, and I am on fire. I got reinvigorated and inspired, and I set some things free that have been tied up and I've been keeping prisoner, and I am so glad. I have a solo episode coming out next week because I have so much that I want to say to you. I'm definitely going to launch a facilitated women's wealth mastermind this coming January. It's going to be private coaching with me, where my promises to you is that I'm going to make a $50,000 difference in your net worth over 24 months. I've been stopped and afraid, and enough of that. I am doing this. I'm going to transform your relationship with your money. This is for a small handful of you listeners and loyals, and more on that later. But not only that, in 2017, I'm going to host my first live event. There, I said it. Out of my vision and into intention and reality I come. Live event, the Profit Boss Convention. That's not its official name, okay? Coming to San Jose, California in fall of 2017. Mark thy calendars. More on that next week. Today's episode is the 3 things your financial advisor won't tell you. Seriously. Most financial advisors want to tell you why they're better than the rest, because as an industry, we are chronically insecure because there are so damn many financial advisors. And for most data heads, sales is just an impossible feat. So most financial advisors just have their hackles up all the time. And a lot of the news is nonsense. So where are you going to get your good info? I bring you Professor Wade Pfau. Wade is a PhD, a CFA, and if you listen to the Ultimate Guide to Hiring a Financial Advisor episode, you know that a CFA is a chartered financial analyst and that it is a ridiculously hard designation to get. And it really means that that person knows what they're talking about as it regards portfolio construction, the stock market, and investments. He's also a professor of retirement income in the PhD program for financial and retirement planning at the American College in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. He holds a doctorate in economics from Princeton University, publishes frequently. He hosts the Retirement Researcher website, and he's a monthly columnist for Advisor Perspectives, a retire mentor for Market Watch, a contributor to Forbes, and an expert panelist for the Wall Street Journal. Boom. Mic drop. I'm going to tell you something. If you want the real deal, you often have to look to the world of academics. The media is almost always slanted. This is not true for every topic, but when it comes to finance and investing, yes, That is where you are most likely to find unbiased, factual information. And part of what I really try to do for you on this show is translate the world of academia to you. I'm like the go-between. I'm the in-between. I'm listening. I have my ear pressed up against academia, and I'm thinking, how can I tell the profit bosses about this stuff and in ways that you can understand it? So today's episode is a little bit of a vitamin pill. It might be a little dry, but it's stuff I want you to know about your money. One of the caps I'm proudest to wear is the one I wear when I cherry pick information and say, hey, I've been trying to earn your trust for years so that you'll believe me when I say you need to focus on this. So now I'm saying it. You need to focus on this. Here we go with 3 things your financial advisor won't tell you. Hi, Wade. Welcome to Profit Boss Radio.
Hi, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Wade, I don't usually start with too much small talk, but you're a rare bird for this show. I mean that with so much love. Not only are you the first man on the show, but you're an academic. I mean, you're a PhD, the chartered financial analyst, a doctorate in economics from Princeton. I mean, I was just on your website and you're wearing this like button-up shirt and a Republican tie, and it looks like a really expensive high-necked cardigan. I mean, it's very intimidating, right? So let's just bring the plane down to low altitude for people, okay?
Okay, sure. So and those weren't my clothes on that picture. So.
They made you wear that cardigan?
Right.
It's very good looking, though. It really works for you. What kind of a last name is Pfau? Where does that come from?
It's a German name, and it means peacock in German.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah, in Berlin, there's a Pfau Island.
Nice. I had no idea. And you just had a baby, didn't you?
I did. Yep. My third.
You have 3 babies.
3. Yes, there.
Do you manage the money in your household, or is it your wife?
In our household, I manage the money. My wife is Japanese, and so that's really just a matter of who's the best at English.
Is that right?
Which is a necessary skill for doing that.
Do you speak Japanese?
Some, but not very well.
Would you tell us a little bit about how money was managed in your household growing up? I'm curious about your upbringing around money since you ended up dedicating your life to the study of it.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, my father passed away when I was 8, so I was raised by my mother, and I guess we were really lower middle class. So that I don't think my mother was necessarily saving a lot of money, but there was the idea that she was saving for college. And I became very much focused on saving. I had a little book where I took note of all the money I earned babysitting, and then every time I bought a video game or something, the expense. But I started sending money to a mutual fund. I don't know what age. I think around 10 years old, actually. But my mother helped get that going.
Wow.
But yeah, by the time I got through high school, I had about, I think, $5,000 or $6,000 saved up in a mutual fund.
You found the one mutual fund that allows investments in $5 increments?
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, there must have been something going on there with that.
What do you think? I mean, you could have focused on a whole lot of things, being someone who lost your father at such a young age. You know, it could have been taking care of your mom, or it could have been taking care of the household, but you got really centered on preparing yourself financially. Did something specific happen, or was it just where you gravitated?
I think it's always been a matter of trying to front load all the work in life to try to then be able to enjoy things later on, to get that basis in place. So that was in terms of saving money, and also just studying and trying to get good grades and being able to get scholarships for college and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Most 10-year-olds aren't thinking about front loading work, though. You do.
No, I guess not.
Are any of your children 10 yet?
My oldest is 8.
So you're going to be really hard on and say, you know, we need to start front loading the work when she turns 10 or he turns 10.
I am trying to get him interested in savings. He has a spreadsheet of the amount he has and saves and then spends. And then for the time being, I'm just crediting him with a 10% annual interest rate on his savings to try to get him to see the value of money growing over time.
You're giving him a consistent 10%. How is that
yeah,
real
it sounds
world?
like Bernie Madoff.
Sounds a lot like Bernie Madoff. Hey, so have you ever made a financial mistake?
Yeah, I have. I got a pretty good lesson when my grandmother passed away. I received a $3,000 inheritance in 1999 that I immediately plugged it all into the tech stocks right before the crash. So lost about 60% of that. And that was a pretty valuable lesson for me, that you don't just follow these sorts of trends, and you just invest for the long term in a well-balanced, diversified strategy. And just because tech stocks were doing well for a long time, up until late 1999, that wasn't going to be the case if that happened forever. And I learned that lesson
Good for
with
you.
a fairly low amount of cost.
Yeah, you did. Okay, so you are human. How do you get started as a professor of retirement income? I mean, it's so specialized. What drew you there?
I started my dissertation in graduate school was about Social Security reform, and particularly in the early 2000s, President Bush had that proposal to privatize Social Security.
Yes.
And so I was studying how that would perform. And that, because that's simulating individual investment accounts as part of the Social Security system, that's the same skills I use today in terms of running different types of retirement income strategies and seeing how they perform. But that's where I had my start more on Social Security. And then after graduate school, I moved to Japan. That's how I met my wife. And while I was there, I focused more on national pension systems. But in wanting to return to the United States, I knew I needed to focus on something more U.S. specific, and found my way into personal finance, which I really didn't know about as a separate field. I came from the world of economics. And personal finance as an academic field is pretty young. Texas Tech University really got the ball rolling in the 2000s, and now there's more and more universities that offer degrees in personal finance.
I thought it was degrees in financial planning. Is it personal finance? Or
financial planning. I think each university may have a different name for it, but financial planning or personal finance.
Right. I mean, most people don't realize, but until kind of maybe the late 70s or the early 80s, there weren't financial advisors. There were stockbrokers.
Right. Yeah, the idea of a comprehensive planner is relatively new still.
It is. It really is.
And having universities prepare people to actually be comprehensive financial planners is even newer.
Okay, so you're a resident guru. You are unbiased, academic, and today we're talking about the 3 things your financial advisor won't tell you. And you're also the king of safe withdrawal rates, right? Or maybe the king of the percent rule. Can you tell my listeners what they should know about the work that you've done? Because, I mean, getting to retirement with a big enough nest egg seems like a huge hurdle for people, but it turns out it really isn't enough.
Yeah, when people start thinking about the reality of how much income they can support from their portfolio, it kind of can hit someone in the head if you just hear that you have $1 million. And $1 million seems like a lot, that you're a millionaire. But then if the reality sinks in that $1 million may only be able to support $30,000 or $40,000 of annual spending in retirement, then that reality starts to sink in that $1 million may not be so much after all. Right.
And that really is, at some point, that dollar amount of your portfolio should actually morph in your mind from being $1 million or $2 million. You should really start to ask that question. What is this actually going to mean to me in retirement? How much income can I produce on a long-term basis from this amount of money? And so it ceases to be the $1 million or the $2 million and begins to be a stream of income in your mind, right?
Right. Yeah, that's really the best way to think about it.
And
people don't get a lot of practice at making that translation. So there's been surveys where it's just they don't have a good sense of how much they can spend from their investment portfolio.
Right. They don't even know to think about it. And so you really made a name for yourself. I think essentially you did research that led you to the conclusion that so first of all, I'll ask you, what is a safe withdrawal rate? But I think you made a name for yourself by publishing a new safe withdrawal rate, by putting a stake in the ground and saying, you think it's X, but it's actually Y. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this idea of the safe withdrawal rate, it goes back to research by a financial planner in the 1990s, William Bingand, who developed what's known as the 4% rule. And that was, he was thinking for a 65-year-old, conservatively, they should plan for, at that time, a 30-year time horizon, so plan to live through age 95. Mm-hmm. And if they had an investment portfolio that's pretty aggressive, he said 50 to 75% stocks, as close to 75% stocks as possible, then they could safely withdraw 4% of that in their first year of retirement and increase that spending level for inflation. And that money would not run out for at least 30 years. In the worst case scenario, in U.S. history, you would have run out of money right after 30 years, starting at $40,000 from an initial $1 million portfolio.
Okay. So you get to retirement, age 65, have your retirement party. You've got $1 million. You're a millionaire. And in the next year, you get to have $40,000 of income. And that's a gross number, right? That's pre-tax.
Right. That's a gross number.
Okay. So that's the 4% rule, says $40,000 from $1 million portfolio. And then what does Dr. Pfau say?
Well, so that number was connected to the worst case scenario, looking at different 30-year periods in U.S. history. But I'm concerned that number may really be too high, or at least it's not as safe as it seems at the present, where in particular we have these historically low interest rates. And when you look at interest rates, the kind of returns you'll get from a bond portfolio are very closely linked to what interest rates are today. Part of the idea of the 4% rule, too, is that even with a 30-year retirement, it doesn't matter what the average return on your portfolio is over 30 years. The early part of retirement will matter disproportionately. If you get bad market returns early in retirement, your portfolio declines in value. And then even if the overall market recovers, you're having to take out an increasing percent of whatever's left. Your portfolio doesn't get the chance to recover. So in this low interest rate world that we're in, as just one of many factors, I'm worried that 4% is too aggressive. A number like 3% may be more realistic, although there's other issues to think about as well. If somebody's flexible to be able to adjust their spending so that if there's a market decline, they can reduce their spending, that gives a lot of freedom to increase their spending initially in retirement. But if you simply look at what is an appropriate number for something like the 4% rule, I think 3% gives you about the same degree of safety as historically the 4% rule would have provided in the past.
Well, that's kind of intimidating. And it's actually kind of disheartening to think I spent my whole life, I saved $1 million, or let's say I saved $2 million and all I get is $60,000 a year in income. I mean, like, what's a good saver to do? It's hard to imagine overcoming that barrier of becoming a multimillionaire and then, swallowing this pill to think, well, my income is going to be that low. Because in some places in the country, $60,000 is a generous living. I live in Silicon Valley. Here, it's really not. So
Right.
Is the core answer either work longer and or save more?
Well, yeah, that's a part of it. And it's really just this reality that interest rates are so low, so you're not getting that kind of income being produced from your portfolio. And also stocks may perform well, but stocks are risky, and for people who are not comfortable having a really high stock allocation, yeah, it's either plan to spend less or save more or delay retirement. Something along those lines are really the only options available.
And now when you talk about 3% being a safe withdrawal rate, and you mentioned interest rates several times, what are the macro allocations to bonds versus stocks that you ran these scenarios in? And for those of you listening, if you want to learn more about stock and bond macro allocations, go back to episode 26, which is about index funds. But Wade, what do you recommend that people have in their portfolio in terms of allocation like that?
Well, the default I'm usually thinking about in my mind when I talk about these numbers would be a 50-50 portfolio, so 50% in stocks and 50% in bonds. And that's not a recommendation, because that really depends on a lot of factors, but that's usually the baseline I'm thinking about for quoting numbers about safe withdrawal rates in retirement.
So if someone's listening to this and they just are hearing this for the first time and they're not really sure what to do with the information, what should they do? Check in with their advisor, talk with their spouse, start to save more? What would you recommend to someone who maybe can't decipher the research but understands it's something to be concerned about?
There's a lot of things so someone listening to the show and who's reading the research, they're really building the foundation to understand these issues. I think talking to a financial advisor, especially a good financial advisor, can be really valuable, at least to make sure that you understand everything and are clear about what kind of path forward can be taken in terms of advisors will have sophisticated financial planning software so that they can run a financial plan and say, well, if you save 15% a year and you're planning to retire at age 65, here's the kind of retirement income you might be able to expect. And if your goal, say, is to spend $100,000 a year in retirement, the software may report that you have a 60% chance that that will work or a 90% chance. There's a lot of factors that go into knowing whether the financial plan has a good chance to be successful. And so working with a financial planner who's able to run that plan with detailed financial planning software can really give someone a lot more confidence that even if they understand all the issues, putting it all together and running the financial plan can create a lot of ease of mind for them.
So it's a matter of taking advantage of the most current research, also planning early and planning well. I mean, I'm a big optimist and I'm an evidence-based optimist. I don't just buy into the doom and gloom of the media because basically it never comes true. But this actually is something people need to be concerned about. I mean, if you have the right portfolio, the economy and global macro events probably aren't going to impact you as much as your savings rate and your spending rate. And so people really need to make sure that they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's here, right?
Right. And this, when I talk about 3% withdrawal rates and things, it sounds pretty pessimistic, but this is not about predicting any sort of stock market crash or anything. This is just the simple reality that interest rates are low.
Right.
And that means bonds will give lower returns in the future.
Okay, so point taken. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the second thing your financial advisor won't tell you, and that is whether financial advisors are truly worth their fees. So recently, the Vanguard organization, and I believe there was another organization that published a couple studies on what they called Advisor Alpha, and you published a response to that. So let's talk about whether you actually think it's a good idea, because as we know, fees and costs are a detriment to the portfolio over time, whether and when you think people should hire a financial advisor based on your research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Vanguard has the concept of Advisor Alpha, and Morningstar wrote a separate report about it, and they call it Gamma. But it's this idea of
which do
the
you
value.
prefer?
I think either name's okay. They both are referring to the same concept, which is just how much better can you do in terms of thinking in terms of your portfolio if you are implementing good financial planning decisions. And so they're both responding to this idea of alpha, which is an investment term. And historically, a lot of like stockbrokers and advisors talked about alpha, this idea that they could beat the market, that they could put together a portfolio that gives you more return for a given level of risk than what the overall market can provide. And academic research, for the most part, says that there's no such thing as alpha. It's a meaningless concept that, on the whole, advisors or any sort of investment manager, no one can really beat the market consistently. There might be rare exceptions, but you cannot really predict in advance what those exceptions will be. So instead of worrying about alpha, worry about something else, and that's implementing good financial planning decisions. And that's what both of those research projects were about, is how do you compare what someone might do with making poor or at least naive types of financial planning decisions versus what would happen if somebody's making good decisions. And then if you have a good advisor who's able to improve the financial decision making, they can very easily outpace any sort of fees. The way Vanguard expressed it was implementing all these good decisions could be the equivalent of adding 4% a year to your investment portfolio returns.
Did you buy that number?
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable. And the point was then, well, if the advisor charges 1% of assets, you're still up 3%. So you're getting a 4% boost and then losing 1% to an advisory fee, but you're still 3% better off. And that's really the idea, that the advisor and then the client are sharing in the benefits of this good financial planning decision making. And everyone's different. It's somebody who's
Sure.
could probably become a financial advisor who can do this all on their own. Then they can think about, well, maybe they just do want to do it on their own, or maybe it's a matter of wanting to outsource that because they don't want to spend all the time necessary to keep on track of all their finances, and they don't want to worry about some issue on a Wednesday evening when they could be doing something more enjoyable. So even somebody who could figure this all out on their own, they still might want to outsource that to a financial planner just to simplify their life and not have to worry about it, or to protect family members. If only one family member in the house is really on top of their finances, then that creates a risk if something happens to that person, what will happen to the other family members? Or otherwise, if someone really just doesn't want to invest all the time and energy needed to learn about financial planning and all these different aspects of building a good financial plan, then that's where, in particular, they may not make all these good decisions on their own. The financial planner could really pay off. And it may just be one major event, like getting the right beneficiary designations or not panicking and selling off all their stocks after a market decline, where the value of the advisor could really pay off for years and years of advisory fees. Just one simple event might compensate for all that.
I think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that one financial mistake really can wipe out years, if not decades, of saving and investing. But it's true. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is in your mind you kind of break time into two lines. And if you hire a financial advisor, in one world, you hire a financial advisor, and in one world, you don't. And so if you assume the same investment portfolio, that somehow you'd be able to get the same investment portfolio, and you could probably get a similar portfolio. It's not that difficult. There's index solutions out there. There's Wealthfront and Betterment, even though they do charge fees. So it's not inconceivable that you could get a portfolio and have a less cost scenario. But then at the end of the day, do you end up with higher income in retirement or lower income in retirement? And that's determined at least partially or significantly by the terminal value of that portfolio. And so at its core, the question is the advisor worth his or her fees? And so your answer, if I can interpret it right, is if the investor isn't doing the work that the financial advisor would do otherwise, then the answer is probably yes.
Right. And there's also so much more that a good advisor does than just pick investments. And that's where something like these Betterments or Wealthfronts, they're really like 20-year-old technology. They're just picking investment portfolios, but there's things like looking at the tax efficiency of the portfolio and making sure that you've got assets in the right, you picking between taxable accounts and then tax-deferred IRAs or 401ks and Roth IRAs. You don't just have the same asset allocation in each of those accounts. You strategically place assets to try to minimize taxes. And that's just one example of the types of things that an advisor will do to improve the portfolio performance on an after-tax basis, which is one of the examples of how the advisor can provide that gamma or advisor's alpha.
Sure. And then if you're a rocket scientist or a surgeon and you retire and you want to become your own financial advisor, you should do that too. And then it's free. Okay. So let's move on to the third thing your financial advisor will not tell you. So for years, investors have argued that risk is their enemy, and people really wanted to invest cautiously. But in fact, inflation is probably a much more dangerous enemy to people in retirement. And so people are accepting higher rates of risk when they're justified by higher expected rates of return. There is another enemy, and that I think is the increasing cost of healthcare. One Health Use Services study estimated a retirement couple's healthcare costs would be $266,000 over the course of a 30-year retirement. And another estimate from Fidelity put the same number near $245,000. So it's like you need to imagine approaching retirement. You need that $1 million or $2 million in savings. Plus you also, by the way, need another $250,000 just for healthcare. So it's much to stomach, right?
Yeah.
So you recently...
And that's just the average. That's the average pocket expenses.
Right. Right. And then there's the data that says the most expensive, you'll probably spend more in the last year or two of your life than on the rest of your life combined. I think I said that correctly. But those last years of life are very, very expensive from a medical perspective. So you recently published on the options for long-term care insurance. Are there good policies out there still? I had recently heard that premiums were going up way too high to be affordable for people and to be justified by the potential payoff. What's your opinion?
I've tried to do some writing about this, and really the three options for funding long-term care expenses are to just sort of self-fund, to have enough extra assets sitting around that you can pay those expenses yourself. Actually, I'm sorry, there's 4 different ways you can do this. The second would be to just plan to go on to Medicaid, although that's a pretty scary option. That basically, once you've spent down all your assets, you can use Medicaid facilities, but the quality of care is probably going to be so much lower than you could get if you're able to pay on your own.
Right, but you have to literally be broke, right?
Yeah, you have to be broke, and then the quality of care I would really worry about as well.
Right.
And then there's the traditional long-term care insurance where you pay the monthly premium, and should you have an event take place that triggers the benefits, then you receive benefits from the long-term care policy. And then there's hybrid policies that mix either an annuity with a long-term care benefit or life insurance with long-term care. The life insurance version is what I'm most familiar with, and that's where someone will have a life insurance policy, but they can essentially spend down the death benefit on the life insurance to cover long-term care expenses, and they might have an additional continuation of benefit rider or something where if they did spend down the entire death benefit, they can continue to receive additional benefits for their long-term care needs. Those sorts of policies generally, they provide a few options that are not available with traditional long-term care insurance. The first being they usually guarantee that the premiums are not allowed to increase. And that's been a big problem with the traditional long-term care insurance, that the premiums increase over time to the point where they become unaffordable. And in a really unfortunate turn of events, a lot of people had been lapsing on their policies, stopping paying premiums right before they actually could have used them because they end up experiencing a long-term care event. That's kind of a tragedy that if someone may be experiencing the cognitive decline that leads them into needing long-term care, that's when they forget to pay their premiums on their insurance.
Yeah, that's
and
why
then they
I
lose it.
personally make sure my clients get their premiums paid. But it
Right.
is true that these contracts don't guarantee that their premiums are going to stay the same. So
Right, premiums increase. And yeah, this is another case where having a financial advisor, if they make sure you continue to pay your premiums, that could potentially right there pay for all the years of planning fees, right, in and of itself.
yeah, definitely. Because the cost of long-term care can be so prohibitively high. So these are special life insurance contracts that allow you to spend down the death benefit, huh?
Right. And they do pretty well in the simulations that I've done because the other thing about traditional long-term care insurance is people tend to worry about, I paid insurance for all these years and never get to use it. So if you never have a long-term care event, that's great. And the death benefit would still be available at that point. So the estate would get something back. So that's the other aspect of those hybrid life insurance policies that I think are worth taking a look at.
And sometimes it's worthwhile for the kids who might be interested in or might feel that they need to pay for their parents to get together with their spouses and siblings and share the cost of these kinds of policies in order to take care of mom and dad. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I haven't seen a lot about that, but yeah, the intergenerational household risk sharing. Yeah, kids trying to make sure their parents are covered so that the kids will not be on the hook for major expenses or otherwise just planning things more efficiently.
Right. I mean, the sandwich generation, how they got that name is because the boomers are having to pay for their parents and at the same time their kids are moving back in with them. So it's a lot to think about. Wade, thank you for being the resident professor at Profit Boss Radio. It's been great having you on the show. I appreciate your unbiased advice. You're very evidence-based, and that's a principle on which the show is founded. But, your calm and steady voice is much appreciated. And thank you so much for making time on a Friday evening in your time zone.
Oh, well, my pleasure. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Take care.
Profit Boss, I think we can all agree that no one needs more information in this world. What we're all looking for is wisdom. And wisdom is that viewpoint or lens that someone sees the world through that can help us see things in an entirely different light, brings clarity, focus, and finally cut through the noise. And I've been thinking about you, and I wanted to have something for you, a gift timed with the election. And I found it. If you're looking for a safe harbor of sorts, if you are tired of the slanted news and you actually want primary research and just good, solid information that dives deep into the policy and politics topics that interest you, you and I are in the same boat. And it may surprise you to know that there is someone out there providing it. I want to introduce you to a podcast called Congressional Dish. I interviewed that show's host, Jennifer Briney, for her money story on this show, and that's going to air soon. But more importantly, she got so passionate during our interview about her own show that I had to give it a serious listen. First of all, Jennifer doesn't even believe in the two-party system, so there is none of the usual rhetoric that leaves any thinking person completely unfulfilled and head-pounding. And now I am not unopinionated on politics, so you don't have to be a complete political atheist to listen and love this show. It's just good information. I checked it out. It's amazing. She blew my mind, and I wanted to bring it to you. Here are just a few things that are probably on your mind right now that you can finally resolve for yourself and be in the know if you check out her show. First, the presidential primary. That's the name of the episode. The presidential primary is obviously over, but what's the actual truth about the candidates, not just what you read in the slanted media? Second, building World War III. You want to know why we've got so much military action happening in the Middle East? Why they're suicide bombing us? Why they hate us so much? Listen to this episode. She has 3 episodes on the Trans-Pacific Partnership that Trump and Hillary have talked so much about, and the USA Freedom Act. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I honestly think this show should be required listening for anyone who votes. It's a listener-supported show. Jennifer absolutely does not believe in advertising, so I recently became a monthly contributor because I believe in what she's doing, and I was thinking, how can I give to her? So this mention and this request that I'm making, that you go, now that you're done listening to Profit Boss Radio this week, go check out Congressional Dish. I put my money where my mouth is. I sent her a check. I'm sending her money every month now, and I'm giving her this piece of my hard-earned platform because she deserves it, and you'll love it. Now go check out Congressional Dish.
Profit Boss, do you hate getting unsolicited advice? I kind of do. Whether it's well-intentioned or not, any kind of splaining just feels, I don't know, sort of aggressive and unwelcome. Of course, when I see someone who's important to me and they're struggling, sometimes it's tough to bite my tongue and just be there for them. So it's kind of a conundrum, right? We aren't here to run our friends' lives, no matter how well qualified we are to do it. On the other hand, if you discover something that's really made a difference to you, don't you just want to share it with everyone? I mean, it would be really presumptuous of me to just assume that my little podcast is something every listener just can't wait to share. But I do know what I hear from my listeners about how Profit Boss Radio has helped them to start changing old money habits and feel more in control and hopeful about getting out in front of their financial security. And I have to think that for every person I've reached, there are thousands more who might feel the same way if they get the chance. So if you're one of my listeners or in our Facebook group and you know at least 1 or 2 people in your social network who could use an encouraging word, let me invite you to let them know about the podcast and about our Facebook group. Just hit the share button in your podcast app. It'll give you a good feeling, I promise. And you'll be helping me accomplish my big, audacious goal of empowering 1 million women to take charge of their financial futures and become millionaires. Lastly, let me just say I'm truly honored to have earned a place in your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot of demands on your time and attention, and I'm so totally grateful for the little part of it that you share with me. So thank you, and let's get together next week for another episode of PBR.
Thank you for listening to Profit Boss Radio, where creating success on our own terms happens every day. You're not alone in your journey to a rich life, and that's why Hillary is here to add value in each and every episode. See you next time on the podcast for women and money.